Amy, I love food. I just love food. And, we go to the grocery store and we pick up food or whatever, and you don't think necessarily about where it comes from, unlike our ancestors had to do. But I remember when I was going to college, and I went to school for 2 years, this rural school in the middle of nowhere in northeast Georgia. And all around us, there were these huge chicken farms. And when the wind was blowing in just the right direction, I mean, it was gag inducing. It was really, really bad. But, at least where Chick-fil-A gets all that they work with, where it starts, right?
That's right.
In South Carolina alone, farmers produce $979 million worth of broiler chickens. Did you know that?
I did not. And that is a lot of poultry. I grew up in Virginia. And when I was in college, it's interesting, Colin, you and I both have poultry stories. I was in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and I would ride my bike to my classes, and inevitably I would be behind a turkey truck, and there would be feathers everywhere. And so, it was interesting. But my favorite food is just about any kind of fruit. And I remember as a kid eating strawberries and apples right out of fields. My grandma had an apple orchard. But now, of course, we are encouraged to make sure we wash everything very well. And I guess times have really changed, and so has food safety.
Yes, thankfully, food safety's come a long way. To help us understand the stories and the words behind food chains and safety issues, we are happy to welcome to the Afterword podcast, Angie Culler Mathews, Food Safety Director with the South Carolina Department of Agriculture.
And in addition to this wonderful episode that we're going to be talking about tonight, we have Dr. Kim Baker. She is the Clemson Cooperative Extension Assistant Specialist and Food Systems and Safety Program Team Director. Say that 3 times fast to help us with this conversation. We're so glad you all are here with us.
Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
And you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words.
Well, both of you have personal stories, and maybe you didn't grow up saying, I'm going to be a food safety specialist, or maybe you did. But in just 60 seconds each, would you mind sharing the Cliff Notes version of your life and who you are? And could we start with you, Angie?
Sure. Thank you, Holland. I did not grow up thinking that I would be in the world of food safety, but I found myself here. I took a roundabout trip. I grew up on our family farm in Calhoun County, South Carolina. I still live there. So I always had a strong connection to agriculture, but went to Clemson, graduated, started working in a tissue culture lab, and went to work after graduating in tissue culture, plant tissue culture. And there I gained a lot of laboratory experience and microbial experience. And I went to work later for a fresh cut produce operation here in Columbia, South Carolina. And I did a lot of their laboratory and microbiological work. I was also their quality assurance and food safety manager. And that is where I made the connection with food safety. And I was there for probably about 6 years, and then I made the transition over to the regulatory world as a food safety officer, and I did field inspections and food facilities all across South Carolina. And from there, the rest is history. I've been with the agency for about 14 years now.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. What about you, Kimberly?
Holland, I'm so glad to be here. Looking back in my history, I always knew I was going to work with food, but didn't necessarily know that I'd have a PhD and be working where I'm at now in food safety. So I always loved cooking and preparing food with my mom, canning with my mom. That's a key to what I do now. And I learned early on in high school that I really had a passion for nutrition and culinary arts. I wanted to be a chef, but I knew that I didn't want to work chef hours. So I went to school. I grew up in Pennsylvania. So I went to a school in Western Pennsylvania called Indiana University of Pennsylvania, or IUP, and got my bachelor's in dietetics there. And they have a culinary school. If you think of Groundhog Day in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, that's where the culinary school is. So I knew that I was close to a culinary school. I had ties through their department with food service management, which I really, really liked. I thought I was going to go into dietetics in food service, and I did for a small portion of my career. So I stayed at IUP and finished out that bachelor's degree, and then I stayed on to get my master's degree in food and nutrition and did a combined internship to become a registered dietitian. And then through that internship, I did work at the culinary school with some chefs, got to meet them and got to know them. They weren't quite sure that registered dietitians in those days could really make good tasting food that was also nutritious. So I gave them a challenge. And now it's really the thing to be a chef and work in the world of nutrition. So I'm really excited to see that part of the industry has grown. But once I got done with my bachelor's and master's and became an RD, I really still wanted to go to culinary school. So I went to Johnson & Wales University when they had a campus in Charleston, South Carolina. Because as I said, I was from Pennsylvania and I was tired of the cold and the snow. So I thought I'd give the South a bit of a try. So I was able to complete my associate's degree in culinary arts with them in 9 months because I had already had so many advanced credits and things through my other degrees. But that was really an exciting time. And I have to say, ever since then, I have lived in South Carolina. I go back to visit my family in Pennsylvania, but I really love it in South Carolina. I did an externship through the culinary school at the Citadel. So I started to work in food service, and I was able to be the chef and the dietitian for any cadets at the Citadel that needed any special dietary needs and prepared their foods, and then was transferred to Clemson to their dining facility. So that was my first professional job as assistant dining hall manager. And within that, beyond just working as the dining hall manager, I worked also as the registered dietitian for the full campus dining facilities. But then looped into that, I was also starting to teach food safety. So all of the employees need to understand not just food safety, but allergies, cross contact as they prepare foods for students with allergies. And I learned that I had a passion for teaching. So I loved food service, but that's when I was like, hey, I really like teaching. So I came across a position that was open for a food safety and nutrition agent with Clemson Cooperative Extension, and took that position. And like Angie said, the rest is history. I was an agent for 7 years and loved being able to take my background and teach food safety and culinary and nutrition all together in one package to the community. We saw a need that our small entrepreneurs wanting to sell foods at farmers markets needed help in knowing where to go and who to contact, what regulatory authorities do they need to fall under. So I was lucky enough to get that position to be able to start teaching entrepreneurs to turn over into a food entrepreneur versus a home preparer. And then I went ahead and worked on my PhD and got my PhD at Clemson in food technology. And I've been working with entrepreneurs and food regulations, and then now work with our entire team. And I just love working with food safety and teaching others all about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be a great conversation, Holland. I'm already intrigued by some of the things I'm hearing, but I'm also a little confused because I am not an expert in food safety. And so let's do a quick round, Angie and Kim. I'm going to toss out a phrase or a word, and it doesn't matter who takes it, but I think some of our listeners may think they know what these words mean, but you all as the experts can help us a little bit to demystify, if you will, some of these terms. So the first one, what's the difference versus recall versus outbreak? What do we mean about that?
I'll take that one. So a recall is when there is something wrong with a food product. Doesn't always mean it's related to an outbreak. So I'll get into what an outbreak is in just a minute. So with a recall, it could be that there's a relation to a foodborne illness where someone could potentially get sick from consuming that food. It could be that another type of hazard was found in that product, glass, plastic. It could be that something is wrong with the package label, that maybe an allergen was mislabeled. So it's usually that something is wrong with that product. There's a hazard, a health hazard, and it has already gotten out to the consumers. And so the manufacturer or regulatory authority may place a recall, meaning all of those products need to be constrained and then brought back so that it can either be investigated of what's going on and then potentially destroyed. So that's that process of bringing those products back to ensure safety of the consumers. Sometimes those recalls, as I said, are related to an outbreak. So when we think of a foodborne illness outbreak is when more than one person presents with the same symptoms related to a foodborne illness. So 2 people have gotten sick from consuming raw, undercooked ground beef. So they are presenting with the same symptoms. They likely have E. coli. If it's 2 or more people, same symptoms, same food, that's considered an outbreak. A lot of times when it becomes an outbreak that someone is getting sick, more than one person is getting sick, that's usually when it gets noted and reported. Certainly consumers can get sick even at home, and maybe a whole family gets sick and technically has an outbreak, but that may not necessarily be reported if they're not sick enough to have to go get medical attention. But we're usually looking at multiple people.
Okay. All right. Angie, do you have anything you want to jump in and add to that?
No, I don't think so. I think Dr. Baker's covered it thoroughly.
Okay. I guess what's coming up for me a little bit is I remember years ago there was a recall on peanut butter and yes, people were getting sick. So that would be an example of a recall because of a foodborne something wrong, and there was more than one person. Okay, great. I think I got it. Okay, how about this one? Inspection and inspectors.
I can take that one, Amy. I'll start with inspectors. So our program is a regulatory program. We have field staff across the state. Those are our inspectors. So they are what we call the boots on the ground. They are stationed all across the state, and they're the ones that are in the facilities that we regulate, looking, observing. They're looking at handling practices. They're looking at labeling. They're looking at sanitation, pest control, and all sorts of things, record keeping. And then what they are actually doing is the inspections. So all of our inspections are generally during production or manufacturing hours or operational hours. So the inspection is the act of being there, observing what's going on, trying to get a clear picture of what's happening in that facility.
I don't think I realized it had everything to do even with record keeping. That's very intense.
Yes. Record keeping is something that that's one of those things that has changed throughout the last few years. There's increased requirements for record keeping, and that's not going away. You know, there's an old saying in the regulatory world: if you don't write it down, you don't do it. So it's proof that, safety parameters, whatever they may be, whether it's temperature or maybe metal detection or pH records, it's a record. It's proof that a business produced whatever product they happened to be producing it at that time according to safety parameters and regulatory requirements.
Okay, well, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. What about inspection then? Is that like that person going in to?
Yes.
Now, are these announced inspections or do they surprise inspections?
So we strive for unannounced inspections. However, like all things, COVID changed that, and we are announcing inspections. Currently, we do work for the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and they have requirements that we also have to follow, and that's one of those things. But yes, the goal is to announce to go into an inspection unannounced. However, there's circumstances that don't always allow that. Some businesses may only operate a few hours a month or maybe a few days a month. So we have to schedule those inspections and ahead of time. Small manufacturers and processors might not have normal Monday through Friday operating hours. They might work on a Sunday afternoon or maybe early Monday morning. So we have to schedule those and announce those ahead of time also.
Okay. All right. What about compliance in food safety? What does that mean?
Compliance really piggybacks with the inspection and the inspectors, because when the inspections are occurring, then those inspectors are looking to ensure that there is compliance. In terms of regulatory jurisdiction, there are some product testing that needs to occur, some processes that need to be followed to ensure safety. So those inspectors are looking for that manufacturer to ensure that they are in compliance with all of those pieces that are required for them to produce their product.
Okay. All right. How about grades? Not, again, in the realm of food safety, what does grading mean?
So that's a little different. So grades it's not really a food safety term at all.
Okay.
That is actually more related to quality. And that's when you say grades, we generally think of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The USDA, they have grade standards that they have set forth for various agricultural products, from produce to beef to all kinds of grade standards. So that's not really a food safety term.
Okay, that's good to know. So what about like those restaurants that get grades on them? Is that something different?
Yes. Right.
Okay.
So that is a sister agency of ours, Department of Health and Environmental Control. Yes, they go into restaurants, and
okay.
You're correct. They do post a grade on the door. We don't do that here at the Department of Agriculture.
Okay. Well, this is so good because obviously when you think about these words, they have different meanings depending on what you're doing.
That's right.
So that's great to clarify that, Angie. Thank you. All right. And then the last one, organic. I do have a little bit of a funny story. A friend of mine was in a store that proposed to be completely organic. And she had just returned from a trip overseas to pick up their new adopted daughter and had seen the environment of where this little one had been coming from. And the produce in this chain store, said organic on it. And she's like, there is nothing organic growing in that country. How can they get to put organic on something? So tell us what this means and how do you get to put organic on something?
So with organic, we have certifying bodies within the United States, and Clemson is one of them, that can take a look at production farms to certify them organic. I'm not an expert in that area, but I can say that they definitely look into the farming practices, the soil. So a new farm coming in, wanting to produce organic. If that farm previous was not organic, there are some time specifications between and some things that they have to look into in terms of that soil and that environment, because it can't immediately be considered organic. Also, any kind of soil amendments that they put onto the produce has to be considered. Then also, how they are harvesting, any pesticides that they're using, all is considered in that process of production. So, a lot of things have to be looked at in terms of, how it's produced, the environment, and what, chemicals or applications may be used on that produce. And at least here with Clemson, we have educators that assist farms that want to become certified organic to go through all of those processes to help them choose what pesticides they're allowed to use, what washes they may be allowed to use after harvest.
Okay. Just, fascinating. I mean, I think everybody thinks, oh, it's organic, so it's got to be safer. I don't know. What do you think?
All about the farming practices, making sure that the farmer is handling that produce appropriately. We teach produce safety rule trainings, which is for farmers in ensuring that they have safe irrigation waters, the employees, the soil amendments. Again, when are they put on? Are they touching any of the edible portion of the produce? So all of that applies no matter if it's organic or not. There's just different routes to go about traditional versus organic.
Okay, I love this. Angie, anything else you want to add to any of these other?
Just that, organic is really, think of it as a labeling term. And like Dr. Baker said, it has to do with the way products are grown or produced, but in the end, it really has to do with the labeling of the product, not necessarily the safety of a product.
Okay, this is so helpful. I am feeling better about this conversation, Holland, but I'm also ready to learn a little bit more. How about you?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, actually. There's certain words that just give people an image of safety or a feeling maybe of safety that might not have anything to do with safety at all. Okay, Kimberly, would you mind sharing with us a little bit of the history of food safety, maybe some of the milestones of these agencies that have sprung up to help guard the food supply?
So we could actually have a whole college class on this topic. So I will stick to it briefly on some of the big milestones you mentioned. But we need to first think way back when, before there were even food safety laws, before there was even understanding of a pathogen, bacteria, all the things that we think of as food safety hazards. It was unknown, but early people were able to understand, well, if I eat this, I seem to get sick. Lifespans have changed. So through trial and error, early on, cooking, salting, fermentation, and then eventually canning were some of the methods that were developed to preserve food, to make food safer. But then from that, of course, more science, more research, more learning has then instilled a lot of changes in how we produce our food and keep it safe. So one of the biggest milestones probably to start food safety in terms of the United States is back in 1862. Abraham Lincoln formed the United States Department of Agriculture. And also about that time, they started a division of chemistry that eventually around 1906 became what we know today as the Food and Drug Administration. There were some changes within that department, but that's ultimately what became what we call the FDA. So we think back all the way in 1862 is when a lot of that food safety thought process started to become a little bit more real. Also in 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Federal Meat Inspection Act were passed. So that was another really big hurdle in the change of our history in food safety, particularly with that Pure Food and Drug Act, making sure that all of our food, no matter if it was meat or other processed foods, was produced under sanitary conditions. I'm sure a lot of you think back to some books that were written about that same time up in St. Clair and meat production. And that's really what pushed these laws and these acts to be passed at that time. So about that time was really a really big change in how we look at our food and how it's produced. There were some revisions along the time between that 1906 and even up to about 1958 of changes and amendments to that Pure Food and Drug and eventually Cosmetics Act, just adding more information about what is safe as additives and things like that. So all of these laws can be progressively changing as the research and technology came out through the years. Some other big things that we think about, 1970, the Center for Disease Control began keeping records of foodborne illness. So we know that foodborne illness occurred quite often before that, but that's when reports started really becoming a lot more frequent in terms of keeping those reports and knowing what is happening within the industry. And then I kind of moved forward a little bit. In 1996, we started with a landmark rule for HACCP systems, or hazard analysis and critical control points. That was focused quite a bit on the meat and poultry industry. So that is taking a look at how meat and poultry is processed and where are the critical points that are needed to implement steps to reduce or eliminate any kind of safety hazards within that production. HACCP systems were also really important for NASA and for the astronauts, because you don't want an astronaut sick in space. You can imagine with foodborne illness, the things that occur in small spaces. So all of their food needed to be prepared under HACCP to ensure the safety of the products they were consuming in space. And then the very biggest change in our history and food safety, and as we know it today, and what I teach a lot about, happened in 2011 when President Obama signed the Food Safety Modernization Act. In the past, all of the things that we have done in terms of food safety were great, but a lot of time it was reactive. So something went wrong and then reacted to that problem. The change of that Food Safety Modernization Act turned the table to where we're looking at making sure that we are preventing food safety hazards. And I say food safety hazards because we always think immediately to those foodborne illness outbreaks, the bacteria, the pathogens. But it's all the other things, the other hazards, the physical hazards, the chemical hazards also involved. So any food manufacturer that does not have to follow a HACCP plan, so meat, poultry, seafood, and juice, all of those manufacturers actually have to follow by regulatory standards HACCP in their system of food production. But all of the other manufacturers now follow under the Preventive Control for Human Foods, which is under that FSMA Act. So we teach that course. Any animal feed, there is an animal feed regulation, so preventive control for animal food. We also have the produce safety rule under FSMA. So there's trainings for that for farmers. And also if you grow sprouts, sprouts is another product that can be delicious. And I did my PhD research on sprouts, but are very, very highly tied to foodborne illness outbreaks. So because of that, the FDA specifically has a rule for sprout growers and how they can try to grow those sprouts safely. So that was a big change for the manufacturing industry, which then on our side in their education is very big because of how we educate them to be able to develop their food safety plans and alter how they do things in their food safety plan. Record keeping is a big one. Some record keeping already occurred, but now there's a lot more record keeping and how to identify those hazards. But then also, and I'll leave it to Angie as well to answer, but it also impacts regulatory side in terms of those inspections, because there are inspections then related to those regulations. So say most recently, that was the biggest impact in our history.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I hadn't realized that it reached quite as far back as you talked about, but also how many important things have happened just in the last few years.
Agreed, Holland. I'm thinking that we only started keeping records in 1970. That's not that long ago. Ooh. So you helped cue this next question up, Kim. Appreciate that. So Angie, you've talked about what an inspector does, but let's kind of walk us through on a typical day and how you have seen that job change over time.
Okay. Well, I'll start with our inspectors because, like I said, they're the boots on the ground. That's where the action happens. They are the ones that are out across the state in the facilities, performing the inspections, ensuring safe products. They're stationed all across the state. So, a typical day would be, they'll start checking emails, things like that. They'll drive. It might be to a facility nearby, or maybe it might be across the state. They'll drive. Some of the things that they do leading up to an inspection is reviewing records. There's a significant amount of training that's required for inspectors. It's not just, you just one day get this job and go out and can perform an inspection. There's an incredible amount of training, almost 2 years worth, that an inspector has to go through just to be able to do basic GMP inspections, which are good manufacturing practice inspections. But so, once they're in a facility, they want to get that clear picture of what's going on, the handling practices that I've mentioned, the sanitation, the pest control, those types of things. So, a lot of what they do while they're in the facility is just observing. And then, oftentimes an inspection might be a multi-day inspection. So, they might come back the next day to review records or things like that. And then, hopefully everything's in compliance and everything is correct. But sometimes it's not. And we do have embargo authority that is actually, we're authorized under our state Food and Cosmetic Act. If a product is unsafe, our inspectors do have embargo authority, and they can put a stop sale on that to keep it out of the marketplace and, out of people's homes. And then, as far as my job goes, I support our inspectors. So, that's what I'm here to do. I collaborate also with Kimberly and her folks at Clemson. If she and I don't talk every day, there's a good chance that some of our staff are communicating back and forth almost every day. So we work really closely with Clemson, the same with our partners over at DHEC. We communicate. I communicate with them almost on a daily basis. Also with our federal partners, FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So we do contract work for the Food and Drug Administration. So they contract with us to actually go out and do inspections on their behalf. So, a typical day, there's not really a typical day. Every day is different.
That was a trick question anyway. I knew that was going to that you.
But that's what keeps it exciting too. So
sure. Embargo authority, Angie. Does that happen often?
And more often than we'd like. That's not something that we want to happen, but
sure.
When necessary, we do have the authority and can remove products that are unsafe from the market.
Yeah. Well, and I guess it's what Kim was talking about earlier about instead of playing catch up, this is preventive action. And so in some ways that's hugely encouraging as a consumer to know that that's out there. Excellent.
Well, earlier, Kim, you were talking about the Food Safety Modernization Act and some of the things that have happened more recently that you're pretty excited about. What would you like to see happen in the next few years in terms of food safety?
I would like manufacturers, particularly the small manufacturers that are getting started, the entrepreneurs, to be more comfortable with everything that they need to follow. And that's one of the big roles that I and my colleagues have, is educating them and helping them through that process, because it can be daunting when they're learning all the ins and outs of how to produce their product and the safety requirements and the regulatory requirements. So just having that ability between myself and my team at Clemson, as well as other states and having other teams across the nation, having the same ability to be out there and to be able to assist, because there are a lot of farmers markets. There are a lot of people that make really good barbecue sauce and pickles and this, that, and the other thing, and they want to sell it, and that's fantastic. But at the same time, there's a lot of education that needs to go on with that.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. I would have expected maybe another piece of legislation or something that we would want to see, but education.
Yeah, just as simple as education, so they can follow that legislation that's out there and ensure that what they're producing is safe. Because ultimately, that's what I care about. What I think a lot of us care about in this role is we want safe food for consumers. We want safe food for ourselves and our families. So no matter if you are a consumer, a small producer, or a large producer, ultimately it's how do you get a safe product, to the market or to your table for your family.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Angie, do you have any other thoughts or maybe something that you would like to see move forward with?
I think that Kimberly really hit it on the head there, education, because there is so many small producers that want to get in the market. They have a good product and they want to get on the market. The regulation that we do have and FSMA is a big, massive piece of legislation, and it can be daunting. Even when you break it down into, the PC rule for human food, it can be daunting to understand it and understand the applicable sections of it. So I think she's right. Education and just helping and assisting small manufacturers and producers, entrepreneurs bring their products to market. Something else that I would really like to see is this piece of legislation for the first time actually addresses allergen and allergen control measures from a regulatory point. And so, there's a growing number of citizens who have food sensitivities and food allergies. And I think just an increased emphasis on correct labeling of products that contain allergens, because it's something that so many consumers and so many households have to deal with.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, Angie, because I remember having to walk into a store when my daughter had food issues that we had to limit everything basically except get her down to water and vegetables. And, it was so hard because nothing at that point was labeled correctly. And I just remember standing there in the aisles crying because I didn't know how to feed my kid. So I'm glad you said that's a great point. All right. So as we wrap up this first part of our conversation on food safety, I would like you, no pun intended, to boil this down to an essential element. What do we need to understand as we think about food safety?
I'll start out. I think that it's important to realize that in the U.S., we have the safest food supply in the world, and that's not by chance. There's a reason that we have the safest food supply. But in that, you also have to remember that food chains and food supply chains are incredibly interconnected. So, something that happens on the West Coast, a growing practice on the West Coast one day and, in 3 or 4 days can be affecting us here on the East Coast. So it's just, you just have to realize those things.
Okay, perfect. Go for it, Kim. What's an essential element we need?
I think we need to realize that every single person, no matter their role, has a role in food safety. Because we have to think that we all need food to eat. So not only when it comes to the consumer that's preparing their food in the home, but who is harvesting the seed, who is then taking care of the soil, who is treating the water, who is actually sowing those seeds or growing those animals, who is harvesting or slaughtering, all that step and all that process. Then when that product gets not only, out of the processing plant or, the farmer's market, then, how is it being transported? How is it being handled at the grocery store? How is it handled by the cashier and the bagger? So every single person has a role. That 2-year-old walking through the produce department who sticks their cute little hand up and touches an apple, they have a role. So yeah, I'm on the extension side. I always think education, but despite all of us that really have that food safety background, it's important for us to get the word out that no matter who you are, no matter what education you have or don't have, we all eat food. We all want really good tasting food. We don't want to get sick from it. And because of that, we all play a role in safe food.
Well said, both of you. Oh, this is good. We've got to continue our conversation, Holland.
Yes, we do. And so we'll say a special thanks to Angie and Kim for helping us to have this conversation so far. And while you wait for part 2, please go to theafterwordpodcast.com and become a subscriber. Leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends about us. And as always, you are welcome at our table.